10:07.
Wonderful. All right. Oh, I got to go back. Best on this earlier.
So just a reminder, you can put your um, questions in the chat as we're going along if you have one while Heather is talking, and then we'll answer them at the end of the section.
Okay, so invasive plants. So many challenges. Okay. And I'm going to point out that I really seem to be picking a lot on French broom. And I think that really it's because it's the main plant that I see in all of my work that I do. I mean, I do see other plants, but French broom seems to be the dominant one when it comes to forest environments. And I'm sure you've all seen this. This is an example of French broom growing along, I think that this is Sweetwater Springs Road, which is the southern extent of the Walbridge fire. This is 4 years post fire. Um, okay. So starting off again with my resources here, Calipsy, California Invasive Plants Council is a really great resource. I have management techniques for all the different invasive plants, not just, French broom, but desert plants, you name it. And then you see ag and natural resources. They have um, a lot of different prescriptions out there for treatment of these bad plants. Okay. So are why are invasive plants a problem? I wish that they weren't. I really wish that they weren't, but they definitely are. Um, they are not involved with the native environment, so they don't have a niche. They they don't have their place, and they spread rapidly. No natural competition. They do well in climates similar to their native range, like the Mediterranean climate, which we have in California, hot, dry summers and cool, wet winters. They have what's known as wide ecological amplitude, which is the ability to persevere in a great number of habitats from low elevation up to high elevation, from, you know, wet conditions to dry conditions. Example would be, I think it's aspen, which grows here in California and it grows all the way back east into Michigan. Um, One of the factors that help in making plants so invasive and spreading rapidly is that a lot of them will have long lasting seed banks, or they produce a ton of seeds, or they do both. And a lot of times the monster isn't the plant, but it's the seed bank. And heat, which is what we get when we have these wildfires, can help induce germination of otherwise dormant seeds. So talking specifically about burn environments are very fragile. They're devoid of existing vegetation, at least right away, and they're highly receptive to infestation. Additionally, when you've got these areas that have been burned, boy, there is a lot of stuff happening after a fire. There's so much rebuilding and restoration work happening. And what's going on when that's happening is these plants are getting moved around from, let's say the guys that are working on the house were somewhere else the day before, and now those seeds are on their tires, and now they're parking in the driveway, and you've got this receptive seed bank that's completely devoid of vegetation currently, and now you've just introduced a population of pests. So increased fire danger. You can see that slide that I had before. It's a monoculture of brush that's perfectly aligned to burn. And potential soil poisoning. I threw that one on there because what a lot of the legumes, like French broom is a legume, they are what we call nitrogen fixers, which is really good if you have a soil that's depleted in nitrogen. But a lot of our forest soils really, a lot of our native plants and our conifers don't really need to be fertilized. And so when you've got legumes that are growing in such great numbers, converting atmospheric nitrogen into usable nitrogen in the soil, it can actually be toxic for plants. An example of that was a really interesting topic that I heard actually at a Cal IPSI conference was they did a study up in Washington State, and there had been a clear cut that had Scotch broom, which is clearly it's related to very similar to French broom, and it had been in this, it had been in this particular clear cut for years and years, and it was an old growth. And they went in there and they dealt with it, right? They treated it, they got rid of it, and then they went in and planted Douglas fir, and the Douglas fir all died. And in that case, the reforestation, the challenge was the over nitrogen. The soil was just too rich. It was over nitrogenated. So I think that takes a long time to get to that point, but it is something that should be thought of because, when we're having these 100% stands of French broom, you're basically increasing the amount of nitrogen that's in the soil, which isn't good for the native plants, trees. Okay, I really like this one. This slide kind of sums it all up because so many times I get asked, I just need to go treat my French broom and I need to do it just next year. And then that's it. Like it's just a one-time thing. And it's not, it's a long-term commitment dealing with invasive plants, especially if they have been, they're well established in the area. If you're able to pull out one single plant and deal with it right away, that's great. And then it might not be such a long-term commitment, but generally these things are long-term commitments because of the fact that they have these strategies for persisting in the environment for so long, i.e. their seed bank. So that's just really, you just have to come to grips that this is going to be something that you're going to be working on a long time. I have a forester friend that said he'd been battling the stand of Scotch broom for years, for like 20 years. And it was just a small area, but it had been so persistent there for so long that, he would spray it and then another one would pop up or it would come in from trucks. It was just a difficult situation. And it was just part of daily life. It's combating the broom. So this is called the invasion curve, and it's kind of going back to the long-term commitment slide. The longer something has been established on the site, the harder it is going to be to get rid of it. So when species are introduction right here, if you can get to it at that point where you have a small number of localized populations, you can usually get rid of it, So if you can keep it from, establishing itself, then that's great. And you have a greater chance. Now, at some point, if it becomes established, you might just be able to contain it and not let it get any bigger, keep it kind of roped in that particular area. But at some point when it gets to be such a large infestation, then your management costs are also going to go up because you're going to have to spend more manpower and more time trying to control it. So one thing we have over here on the left is prevention. And I would say this is one of the most important things. An ounce of prevention. Oh, wait. Wait. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Okay, this is so true, especially on these burned areas. So if you have a fire, this is one of those times where you do not want to let bad plants get in there. And you also might be able to deal with a lot of the plants that were there before that were bad, that were burned up because of their biology. But keeping bad plants out, boy, it'll just save you so much heartache later. So I know these are all very depressing, looking at the long-term commitment, the invasion curve, but my favorite hero, Aragorn, said there's always hope. So just got to always remember that. You can never give up. So what are some of the factors involved in helping invasive plants thrive? You know, we talked about a little bit about that just a couple slides ago, but one of the things here, you see this is up there in near Anthony Peak in Mendocino County on the Mendocino Complex Fire. This burned really, really hot. It is just a prime area that's ready to receive bad plants if they were to arrive there. So this is where, at this particular site, there were no invasive plants. And so when we had planting crews come in, we needed to be very careful that they were not transporting seed from other areas to this. That ounce of prevention, right, is going to be worth a pound of cure. This was a really sad for me when I saw this. This is called stinkwort, and I'm sure you've all seen it before growing along the highway. Stinkwort is terrible. It's in the aster family. It's really sticky and very bad smelling. It has a very difficult time establishing outside of bare mineral soil, and you see it growing along the highways, like Highway 101, up and down the highway, and its biology is such that it is a summer annual, so it doesn't sprout until after the crews have gone through the highway and sprayed everything along. That's why it's the only thing you see in the fall, is because it hadn't even germinated yet. So the county is treating, their timing is off when it comes to this particular plant. And one of the things I've learned driving up and down Highway 101 is that you only see it where you have the gravel, the disturbed gravel dirt area. But once it becomes grass, it cannot germinate in there. And then, so it's not able to establish. Well, here you've got, this is the glass fire. This is Schramsberg, just above Calistoga. And this was beautiful forest before the glass fire. And there were no invasive plants, and there were no stinkwort. And so how did it get there? The mode of transportation on these plants are by air. So it floated there and it landed. And so I, of course, pulled it up, but I'm sure there were others out there. And my objective for the day wasn't to pull stinkwort up. And you really should have gloves when you pull it up, by the way, because your hands will just be tarry black. But the fragile receptive ground and coming in by air. So sometimes you can't even control the introductions in this case, because it was through the wind and the seed type. Okay. So this is my favorite, one of my favorite slides. This is a glass fire, and that's French broom right there. And I believe we had sprayed it. It was starting to turn. So heat-induced germination. Oh, okay. Let's talk about germination here. So scarification and stratification, those are the two types of prep that seeds need in order to germinate. And so stratification is cold. So a lot of times the seeds will have to go through the winter before they're prepared to, and they will germinate. So they have to kind of have that seed coat broken down with the cold, or they need to be scarified. So you can do that many times with, in this case, they were using a sandpaper or rocks or heat. So that's that. So fire and French broom do not go well together unless you're prepared to deal with the aftermath, because you thought you just had one or two plants. And in this case, this particular property above Calistoga had a lot of French broom, and the landowner had been on his own, had been trying to treat it. And then he had a nice, it was an oak woodland kind of I think it was probably predominantly oak woodland as it kind of neared the valley floor, live oak. And there were no, as I recall, because I was out there working on the property before the glass fire happened, but you only had French broom along the roads, and there was no French broom in the forest or in the oak woodland. Well, after the fire, it was everywhere. So it had been basically seeding in, and somehow it was kind of being carried off by animals or whatnot into the forest. And suddenly there it was. And it was it was 100% covered, which was shocking to me because there wasn't 100% Scotch broom or French broom before the fire. And the fire heat induced germination, and there you have it, which when we talk about integrated pest management could be beneficial. In this case, you have a fresh seed bank, but we'll talk about that later. So you have heat induced germination. That's another bad thing for these areas that have been burned. I'm going to use this slide a couple of different times. I took this picture because I thought it was so telling. This is, you can see the non-burned area and then the burned area down below. And this was a prescribed burn outside of Healdsburg. And it wasn't a hot burn. I think the guys had just dropped, took the drip torch and just burned off a little bit of the litter. And where it burned, you had all of those French broom seedlings. And the French broom were there. There was an infestation that he had been trying to deal with, and it actually cleared it out as a fuel break. But this was all lying in wait in the fuel break. And the mulch was kind of holding it back. You could see that it's not able to germinate through the mulch, even though it's a very thin layer of mulch. But the second that the mulch was removed and you had that heat, boy, the seedlings came. And it was difficult to treat later because it's hard to see those, when they're that little. Okay. So the other reason they thrive is that they generally come from Mediterranean regions that have very similar climate. California has a very Mediterranean climate, and so it's just perfect. And things are getting warmer, right? So I've seen Scotch broom marching up the mountain to Donner Summit, where it's seen it in high elevations where I'd never seen it before. It's just it has a wide ecological amplitude, meaning that it can adapt to a lot of really various environmental factors, but it's also, able to go up into areas that it would never have grown before, just because of the global warming. Spread is help facilitated by roads. This is so common. This isn't an area that burned, but it was a good picture to show the spread along the road. This is up in Mendocino County, Jackson Demonstration State Forest. And they have a broom problem also, and they don't have a fire. Broom is everywhere. If this forest was to burn, it would probably all be French broom, similar to the picture of Calistoga, the glass fire, because you've got these plants that are producing thousands of seeds. And that's one of the problems with French broom, is that a mature plant can produce thousands, 50,000 seeds, and they last for 70 to 100 years. So you've got a seed bank that is getting annually added to, and it's just a nightmare. But you've got roads here and all along the roads, and for different reasons, we're moving, we're driving on my ATV, and I'm picking up seeds, and I'm driving around, and I'm moving into other places, and it's difficult to try to to manage for that. But not only that, you've got road right of way to try to maintain the clearance on these roads, and so people are kind of treating the vegetation nearby. And what happens when you treat, you can never have bare soil, and if you have broom, it just all ends up being broom. This is a picture I took yesterday, and this was a fuels treatment, and the people that were doing it weren't looking at the big picture and thinking, oh wow, we have a broom problem nearby. We should be thoughtful about, when we open up this ground, what's going to come there. It's not going to stay open like that. If we didn't have broom, it would actually probably be a very nice open area, and it would take a long time for native brush species to kind of invade, because they need bare mineral soil. You can see there's some bare mineral soil here. There was a tractor or something ran over, but broom doesn't need bare mineral soil to invade. It will just come in and it will grow. So this probably in about a year or two will be head high in broom, and then all of those savings for fuels reduction is lost. And that was all because someone was unknowing and just did not think about the broader picture about, if I do this, what is going to happen? Because every action has a reaction, right? And I think people don't necessarily always think ahead on some of these things. And it's kind of a bummer to see, in my opinion. Okay, looking at road spread. This is I stole the slide yesterday. This is stinkwort and how stinkwort has spread over time, where its origin was at San Jose in 1984, and then just riding on the tires of wheels, it's managed to it's basically everywhere now, and it's nasty. So okay. Oh, I already had that slide. Oh, okay, here's stinkwort. I guess stinkwort is another plant that I dislike because I tend to have a lot of slides. This is the Tubbs fire above Santa Rosa. This little plant is really tenacious. As you can see, it was growing in the one single crack of the road, and it's going to seed, and it's very difficult to kill because it's very glandular, so it's very sticky, and it's hard to herbicide to get through to go through the cuticle because of that. It's just a really tenacious little plant. So we talked about the abundant long-lasting seed bank. This is French broom. But this abundant long-lasting seed bank, it can actually you can use this to your advantage during integrated pest management and trying to actually deal with this particular plant. There's some seeds. All right, so how do we overcome invasive plant challenges? Oh, there's lots of different ways, but like I said, it's long-term. Got to really just be in it to win it. I like this slide because I feel like when I was putting this presentation together, I realized that everything is so interconnected. What we do when it comes to just managing our properties, like I said, every action has a reaction, and you need to be thinking about that and just be mindful of, what if I do this, what's going to happen? So that's my interconnected slide. Stop the spread. So when you go to and I know so many of you looking at the questionnaires that you filled out before, a lot of you have had your properties burned in one of the many fires that have happened in the Bay Area, or maybe outside of the Bay Area. But one of the things that you can look at is when it comes to invasive plants is what is growing there. What plants do I have, or does my neighbor have? Right? Not necessarily you, but if your neighbor has bad plants, then you're going to have bad plants because they don't know property boundaries. They're going to spread wherever they can. So knowing, what issues you might be up against. And then once you know what those plants are, what are their modes of success and spread? Looking at I'm always, every time I drive, I'm looking at these plants. Like I said, it's like an obsession with me. And like, how can I use their biology against them? How can I look at where they have their weak spot, like stinkwort. Stinkwort doesn't like to grow anywhere that's not bare soil. So if you can have some sort of material, anything that's there before stinkwort gets there, then your chance of stinkwort being able to invade are very, very low. So maybe having mulch, or you just having plants there, and having that. You don't want to have bare ground when it comes to stinkwort, okay? When it comes to French broom, what is its mode of success? Its mode of success is putting on a lot of flowers that turn into seeds that stay in the soil forever. And so if you can just stop them from flowering at some point, the very least, you're going to stop them adding to that seed bank. So how do they spread? What are their, success strategies? And looking at what you're doing now that might help facilitate that spread. Maybe you didn't know that burning was bad for French broom. That's one thing that I I get a little upset when I see everybody just using throwing the word fire around for reducing invasive plants. Well, I wish we could just burn and invasive plants would go away. And I think that there's at some point, if you were burning constantly in the same spot every year, yeah, you'd probably not have those plants. But in many cases, as you saw, the burning is actually exacerbating the problem. But if you are doing integrated pest management and you know that, you can actually use that to your advantage with coupling it with another attack mode as well. So looking at what you're doing, maybe you didn't know that you're driving through that Medusa head or that barbed goat grass infestation in your meadow, which every time you're driving through there, you're putting those seeds on your tires and you're moving it to an area that doesn't have anything at all. And that would be a really great measure of just preventing it from moving. So looking at what you're doing, how can you maybe actually just stop doing whatever it is that you're doing to not continue to exacerbate the problem. So this is a good example of being thoughtful. And this was a situation that did not need to happen. This was the first time I'd ever seen this plant actually behave this way. This is that Aerogeron bonariensis. It's a horseweed. And this was a well-intentioned land. This is the Walbridge fire. This particular landowner used herbicides on this site and was not really thoughtful about what they were using, and they basically were trying to site prep the soil so that they would have a bare ground to plant trees. Well, they already had the bare ground from the fire, but they didn't want to have any weeds because, anytime there's any sort of competition and you're planting trees, they're taking away from your trees. And so it's a lot of times you don't want to have any other native plants out there. You don't want to have brush, you don't want to have grass, you just want to have bare soil. Well, in this case, those native plants, they were out there and they could have been spot treated or just not completely annihilated 100%. In this case, it was 100% annihilation with an herbicide, several different types of herbicides, without thinking, oh, what's going to grow there? Because, oh gosh, you can never have bare ground. So they came in and they planted the trees, which was wonderful. Well, what happened was you had adjacent stand of this horseweed that its mode of transportation for its seed is through the air. It's very light, feathery. It's in the aster family, and it floated in the wind and 100% took up this entire site. So much so that it killed the trees that they had planted. And it only took less than a year for this to happen. And so this was a situation that did not need to happen. So just being thoughtful about what it is that you're doing and what could happen if I did this. So like I said, everything's interconnected. This is back to my fuel break picture that was cleared without understanding the invasive nature of the French and Scotch broom. I'm sure the people that did this did not know what they were doing and have no idea. They probably think that's a native plant. But it's going to be really bad. It's going to make that area even more flammable than it was likely before. This is Skaggs Springs Road on the way to Cazadero or Annapolis, and this is the northern end of the Walbridge fire, and this saddens me every time I drive up it. I saw these guys clearing the road without thinking that once they cleared it, it was actually become even worse. It was going to become even more vegetated with bad plants than what it was before. They spent all the time and money in clearing the road. So they did a lot of chipping and actually probably even helped facilitate spreading the seeds. So they did not know what they were up against. And so now there's broom up and down. It's going into the forest. It's really, really sad. Super sad. Okay. I think I'm done with the invasive plants section, Patty.
Okay, we have questions, or we have a question. In terms of treatment, is Scotch broom the same as French broom?
Hmm.
I was wondering the same thing.
And I was looking for I thought about that, getting a photo to try to show you guys the difference. They are different plants. And there's actually Portuguese and Spanish broom out there now, which is even bigger. But they all behave very similar. French broom is the one that has the leaves. You can see the tiny leaves. Let's see. Oh, there we go. French broom has leaves. You can see the tiny leaves. Scotch broom doesn't really have leaves, and it's a darker green, and the stem is striated, meaning that there's like ridges. If you were to twirl it on around your finger, you would actually feel those ridges. So really tiny leaves on French broom, no discernible leaves on Scotch broom. French broom is easier to pull by hand. It comes out, maybe it's because it doesn't have the striations, but it also seems to just be easier in general to hand pull. Scotch broom tends to really dig down in there, but I've noticed that Scotch broom doesn't. On the coast and in Sonoma, it's not really as bad of a plant as French broom, but I've noticed this Spanish broom, which is coming in, is actually, it's like a giant Scotch broom. That seems to be spreading rather quickly, like along Highway 101. But the treatment is still the same. They still produce thousands of seeds that last for a long time.
Okay, we have, what are the best ways of removing and reducing stinkwort once you have it, especially along ranch roads?
Okay. So in that case is just understanding it's an annual. So what you're doing, it grows up, it does its whole life cycle, and then it dies back, and it's already spread. So what you want to do is you want to keep it from germinating the next year, or knowing that it's going to germinate. So like an example with Caltrans, if they had just done their herbicide treatment a little later in the year or went and did another one, they would not be, they'd be killing all of that stinkwort that's now traveling on everybody's tires up and down Highway 101. So treating it probably with a pre-emergent herbicide, which is going to catch it before it starts to grow. And we'll talk about herbicides in a little bit, but it's really difficult once it's established because it is so glandular and sticky. It's hard for any kind of herbicide to penetrate into there and to kill it. And if you can get it ahead of time, especially on a road, you don't have to worry about what else is growing there because you probably don't want to have anything growing there anyway. So the pre-emergents are pretty good at killing everything that wants to sprout. So they can be used in forested environments. That slide that I showed you right here, this one had pre-emergent done. That's why there was nothing there. But in the case of a forest road, that would be a great way to go about it. And they germinate, I want to say, late summer. Oh,
I was muted, sorry.
oh, okay. I was like, oh no, something's wrong with my.
No, I forgot to unmute. While we're still on broom, let's say, what is the best treatment plan for French broom?
Okay, well, I'd like to know the scenario. Can they tell me the scenario? Is it already established or is it just coming back up?
Okay, while she's putting that information in, let's go on to another question.
Okay.
What's the best method for removing sorry, before we do that, she said it's already established.
Okay. So on really thick established stands like this one that you see here, I would probably, you've got all that material. You could either get rid of the heavy or the material by masticating it. Once things get above head high, it's more difficult to herbicide, with a foliar. Usually there's a couple of different things that you can use on that. And French broom is easy to kill. It's like I said, it's the seed bank. So in this case, you might want to reduce that biomass by removing it. And then waiting for them to resprout, because they do resprout. If you were to cut those down, they would just go ahead and resprout off of the same stem. And then, of course, you're going to have all those seedlings below. But if you can get rid of the biomass, and you're not going to want to have the biomass there because it's going to act somewhat as a mulching layer. And then you're going to still have that nightmare below the mulch layer, as you saw in my favorite slide. Let's see, this slide where you've got all those seeds, on the left, you have all those seeds, the same amount of seeds as you have on the right. They're just hidden by the mulch layer. So if you want to mulch it and leave that material there and let it kind of cover up, that's great. Or if you remove the material and then dealt with the aftermath. So once the seeds come up, you use less herbicide and it's easier to get at, and you don't have to put as much on, versus, if you've got a guy with his wand and you don't ever want to, I never like it when they have to raise the wand above their head. I just want to have it head high and below. So removing the material, making sure that isn't composted and moved off site. So you don't want to give your problem to somebody else. So either burning that in an area that is your burn pile area. You can manage any kind of sprouts that come off of the seeds that were already maybe on the plants that were existing. And then going back to where you have the infestation and then dealing with the stuff that comes up with systemic herbicide. You could also, if you had the ability to burn all that biomass off, which is what happened in all these fires, and we can talk about later is how we use that to our advantage. If you can have a fire go through these areas and get rid of the burn or the biomass, which is all of the plants themselves, and then it helps germinate all of those seeds, you can go ahead. And this is a great example of integrated pest management. We're using cultural burning and then attacking it with, you're getting 100%, hopefully 100% germination of all of those seeds, attacking it with herbicide and then monitoring it. You have to monitor it because, like I said, it'll probably always be plants coming up in that area, but hopefully if you can deplete the seed bank and not add to it by letting anything else go to seed. It takes about 3 years for French broom to start producing bridal seed. And so that was the thing with the glass fire, is trying to jump on, treating all of those baby seedlings that were coming up after the fire before they could start producing seed, and then get rid of the problem completely. So.
Okay. Right. So she summed that up as masticate, remove material, and then next year herbicide?
Yeah, you can masticate, you can hand pull, you just getting rid of those mature plants because they're that big, it's going to be difficult to get in there, and you don't want to have to treat plants that, you don't want to have to herbicide all those. It's better to just get rid of it mechanical and then herbicide.
Okay.
And monitor,
yes.
And then retreat and monitor.
Okay, so what's the best method for reducing blackberries? What is the best way to reduce resprouting on bay trees? Oh, it's actually 2 questions.
Okay.
Once you've thinned them. And it says, what herbicide do you use and how with bay sprouts?
Okay. Well, let me answer. I used to think that blackberry was the worst plant. And now I look at blackberry, I'm like, oh, blackberry, you're not that bad, now that I see all the other bad plants that are out there. But it's really difficult to get rid of blackberry. After the fires, I remember going out on these properties, and what's difficult after fires is that, people have lost everything. They've lost their house, or they've lost family members, their pets. the last thing they want is somebody to tell them, oh, this is a great opportunity for you to get rid of your blackberries, because now you can just pull it right out of the ground, right? But it is a really great time after fire to pull blackberries out, because they're actually have a very small root ball that's not very far below the surface, but it's difficult to get to when they're alive, right? Because they are so painful to walk through. So I have heard of people using goats, and how they use goats is they actually put plywood over the plants so that the goats could walk on the plywood and then kind of eat around it, and then eat it down to the point where at that point they might be able to hand pull. Herbicides are not super effective on blackberry. But like I said, if you can get rid of the biomass so that you can get in there with just a little bit of elbow grease, and then you could pull it up. Now, after a fire, that's such a great opportunity because you don't have any biomass and the ground is so soft and, just easy to pull them up. So that's blackberries. I would go and look at other tips and tricks on some of those websites for blackberries. What was the other plant? Laurel. Yeah. So laurel isn't an invasive plant, but is definitely a plant that tends to come back really quickly after these fires. And there are a couple of different ways that I've dealt with them because they do sprout, and you can use a Mazapure, which is an herbicide that works on hardwood species, and you can either spray it if they're small enough, or you can hack the sprouts. It's better to hack the mature tree if it hasn't fallen down yet. But a lot of times what I found was that landowners were going in and they were falling all of these trees, which you don't want to, because if you're planting, you want to have dead shade. We talked about dead shade. But if you do cut it down, they tend to be more prolific sprouters and harder to kill once they're resprouting than if you were to kind of catch them off guard and they were still standing. And laurel is not super easy to kill because it does have so many oils in circulating. So it's not a super easy tree to kill. And it's one of those where you might have moderate success, and I always tell people it's fine. It's a native plant. You just don't want to have, a solid 10 acres of it. You might want to just have half the amount. So it's fine if it doesn't all die. But that's how I've approached it. And it definitely is an issue. But it was helpful in some of the properties for reforestation in those areas that we were planting. If the trees were near the laurel was kind of helping provide that much needed shade in the hot summer months.
All right, that's it for those questions. Do you want to take a 5-minute break, Heather, or do you want to keep going?
Let's do it. Let's see. Let's just do it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The next big push is integrated pest management, and then just a short section on pest management practices for roads. But
okay, great.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, let's be back at 10:56.
Sounds good.
All right.